What would have amounted to a virtual trade embargo between the world's two largest economies averted, at least for now. The US and China agreeing to put a pause on triple-digit tariffs for 90 days. That leaves levies on American goods to China at 10% versus the up to 125% announced in April. Duties on Chinese goods to the US also kept on hold at 30% compared to a threatened 145%. Also withheld for 90 days the inclusion of some American firms on China's trade and investment restriction lists. The pause to the 10th of November was a widely expected conclusion to negotiations held in Stockholm late last month. Washington saying it needs the time to work out how to remedy trade imbalances and unfair practices, while Beijing is looking to correct what it considers unreasonable trade restrictions. And for more, let's bring in CNA's Deborah Wong reporting from Shenzhen and Toni Waterman in Washington, D.C. Deborah, let's get to you first. What stands in the way of the U.S. and China reaching any compromise on their trade differences?
So we still have the issue of China's purchase of Russian oil. China has not backed down despite warnings from the U.S. that it will be facing 100% tariffs. Now, the Chinese Foreign Ministry has also maintained, in reference to this issue, that the country will ensure its energy supply in ways that serves national interests. Now, India, in not backing down, actually got slapped with 25% of tariffs. So this matter is still up in the air, and we'll have to see whether any updates will pan out over the next 90 days. Now, the other issue that we're also scrutinizing is the growing mistrust of NVIDIA's H20 chips in China. Now, we know that NVIDIA has been used as a bargaining chip, in the trade talks following export controls on U.S. high-tech, bans to China. Now, chips are seen as a linchpin to accelerate China's growth, accelerate China's AI growth, and that is something that the U.S. is keen to stamp out. So the company secured a license from the U.S. to export these H20 chips to China. The problem is, just this past weekend, we're seeing Chinese state media urging Chinese buyers to boycott these products, claiming that these products designed specifically for the Chinese market are unsafe. They're accusing the U.S. government of embedding backdoors in the chips to monitor China. Now, NVIDIA has come out to deny these allegations, but we are seeing a corresponding shift to domestic chip makers. And if that happens, China's attempts to strengthen self-reliance will definitely make it hard for the U.S. to use NVIDIA or even AMD chips as a bargaining chip in future trade talks.
Now, Toni, we heard Deborah there. So that agreement between NVIDIA and AMD and the U.S. government, taking some revenue and giving NVIDIA and AMD a license to sell certain chips to the Chinese market. So that's one thing that the U.S. could give in return. Does the U.S. have anything it could give to China in a deal without looking weak?
Well, there are a number of things that the U.S. wants from China, and it knows that to get those things, it's going to have to give some of those things up. You talked about those AI chips. That is one of the biggest sticking points in these negotiations. But it seems as if relaxing these export restrictions on these AI chips might end up just being about revenue because of this unprecedented deal that the U.S. government struck with NVIDIA on this, 15% of its revenues in order to get those export licenses. This is essentially a quid pro quo. So it might be that the U.S., and Trump has certainly hinted at this, would be looking for better access, further access to these revenues. But there are some sticky points from the U.S.'s side as well. President Trump is urging China to quadruple its soybean purchases. This would help placate his farming base. The White House, again, as Deborah was just mentioning there, would really like to see Beijing stop buying cheap Russian oil, which Trump says is fueling the Kremlin's war machine. On the stickier side of things, the U.S. really wants China's help in stopping the trafficking of fentanyl and specifically the precursors to the drug, and it wants better guaranteed access to China's rare earth magnets. It had reduced some of those export controls Beijing had from earlier in the trade war when it kicked off. But there are these outstanding grievances that the U.S. has had for a very long time as well. This is around unfair trade practices, intellectual property infringement, and industry subsidies. And again, the U.S. knows that to get any of these things, it's going to have to make concessions of its own.
All right, Deborah, you heard Toni that restating and adding to that list of costs and benefits both sides will consider if they agree to strike a deal. And what could go some way to making that deal possible would be a meeting between the U.S. and Chinese leaders, given Mr. Trump's interest generally in attending leader-level summits.
So economists are also saying, that the potential summit between the leaders could very well boost some optimism. Economists have warned that the U.S.-China trade war will already reshape trade alliances. It's going to be changing supply chains. And in that process, we have already seen Chinese manufacturers increasingly parking their operations in Southeast Asia, perhaps even moving their factories to the Middle East or even to South America to circumvent the tariffs. And, Toni mentioned earlier about the soybeans example, and that's something that we're seeing Trump call on China to do more for its agriculture. But in fact, in the last couple of months, China has shifted to buying more soybeans from Brazil instead. It is a trade partner, a very key political ally, for China. And so the summit could then pave the way for leaders to set aside these aggressive trade tactics, perhaps work out how to reduce the trade deficit that the U.S. is experiencing, perhaps also offering long-term stability for investors across all these supply chains. We're looking at the example today where markets rallied after the truce was extended. We saw markets in Japan and Australia hitting record highs. The stock markets in Europe also opened higher. So it's safe to say that the potential meeting will certainly offer a confidence boost to economies around the world. Now, the U.S. has confirmed that Trump could attend ASEAN Summit in October. Chinese side has not confirmed yet, but all eyes are on this as well as the APEC Leaders Summit because all these are going to be happening just days before the trade truce expires in November.
Oh, Toni, you heard that. So you can see these market rallies could be viewed from one angle as almost a hunger for stability, given all this instability. But for American businesses, which need to plan, depending on the sector, long-term or shorter-term planning, how are they managing the chop and change in Trump's trade policy?
Well, you're right that businesses are desperate for some stability, for certainty, one way or another. And many of them feel that they have now gotten that to some extent with Trump's global set of tariffs, which kicked in last week. But there's, of course, a lot of uncertainty around China, which would have by far the highest tariff rate, 145% on goods entering the United States and 125% on American goods entering China. And that would essentially halt all trade between the world's two largest economies, which totaled more than $600 billion last year. Now, a lot of these companies have been seeing, as Deborah mentioned, if they can shift production to other countries. Trans-shipping tariffs have been set at 40%, which is high, but of course it's a lot lower than 145%. And some are looking to perhaps shift some of their manufacturing, if they can, to the United States. But the majority are simply stockpiling to try and temporarily get ahead of these duties. All of these options, though, come at a cost. And this latest pause in these tariffs is going to expire on November 10th. So right ahead of the holiday shopping season. I mean, Black Friday is just a few weeks after that. So it could seriously impact what is normally one of the most lucrative times of the year for a lot of consumer facing companies. The biggest unknown, of course, is whether these tariffs might last. The longer they're in place, the more difficult it is going to be to wean the government off of hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars in additional revenue, even if it comes at the cost of the American consumer.
Oh, thanks. Toni Waterman, live from Washington, D.C., and CNA's Deborah Wong in Shenzhen. And joining me now in the studio is Clark Jennings. He's Managing Director of Asia of Kroll Global Advisors. Thanks so much for coming in to join us this evening. Mr. Jennings. And we just heard from our correspondents there, almost this search for certainty in a sea of uncertainty. But 90 days more, 90 days back, after threats, social media posts, moves, more threats, counter threats, have we even moved at all in, 100 days?
It's hard to say that we've made any real meaningful progress, such as it is. I think this is the Trump White House running into the hard reality that trying to address any of these unfair trade practices and complex issues in this bilateral relationship that your colleagues just discussed are hard. This is an extraordinarily complex, perhaps the world's most consequential bilateral relationship. And it's not just trade and economic matters. It's not just soybean purchases, as we've heard, but it's also issues intertwined with national security, with technological competition, with the economies of tomorrow. And that's not issues that you can just wave the tariff wand and expect to fix.
To be fair, it's not just tariffs. They've also threatened on other issues. So, for example, curbing exports of chips that are vital to China growing its industry, and that has invited Chinese eye. So the difficulties here, the huge bundle of issues dating back decades that are in many cases systemic to both countries' economies, neither seriously is expecting any deal that would actually begin to address these issues.
Right. Traditionally, free trade negotiations, as we know them, tariffs are actually kind of only the leading edge of that. They take a lot of time. There's a lot of effort that goes through them, but it's really those deeper issues, what trade negotiators would say behind the border, non-tariff barriers. Your colleagues again mentioned it. It's the broad gamut of unfair trade practices, from intellectual property protection, forced joint ventures, data localization. We're not addressing that.
Could we make progress on those?
That's a question. I think that we will wait and see. My concern is that if we see a summit coming up between Trump and Xi, I think President Trump favors eye-popping headlines. We saw as he traveled to the Middle East, to the GCC countries, he took a delegation of American technology CEOs, and he's hinted that he wants to do that with China. That's well and good for commercial issues, getting quote-unquote wins for American companies in China, but it's not addressing the core issues at the crux of the matter between these two powers.
We've seen a suggestion of what that could involve. So the NVIDIA deal that my colleagues mentioned as well. I think I've heard criticism coming out of Washington saying, you've sold our national security for hard cash.
Yeah. I think this, candidly, I think it reeks a bit of extortion almost. Now, NVIDIA and the U.S. government are going into business hand in hand in China. It's unprecedented. So we need to say that. This is not normal. And I think that is right. The theory that it's basically giving away the game for cash, it belies the lie there, the story that this White House is so concerned about national security that we have to protect and not allow the export of the leading edge chips and the leading edge American tech stack. Instead, he's saying it's open for business as long as you're paying tribute to me.
You say it's not normal. In fact, a great deal has not been normal since January of this year, including for me, and I'm naive here, what I thought was the response from many countries, whether individually or as blocs. We heard we will not even allow a baseline 10%. And now we see countries almost falling over with gratitude that they only have 15% or counting their blessings for getting 20%. Right. That's not normal either, is it? It's
not normal. Now, part of that is Trump 101. That's the art of the deal playbook. We start with a maximalist position that puts fear into the market and into the eyes of the negotiating partners, and then we come back to that. So part of that is to be expected from Trump. But you must acknowledge that they have bent the will. I think you saw Jamie Greer, the U.S. trade rep in the New York Times, with a boasting op-ed last week about remaking the global order. At least in the short term, they've been very effective, exactly as you say, bending the will of political leaders and would-be trading partners around the world, bringing them to Washington, making concessions, seeking to avert what could be catastrophic economic effects. And so in the short term, credit to them. The question is, at what cost and at what impact over the long term? And that story is yet to be written.
We will have to return to that longer-term cost. But just to wrap up this session very quickly, because we'll focus on China for this particular part of the interview. For China, China is not like others. So China did not bend the knee, as it were, because it's got critical minerals. Mm-hmm. And that's the trump card, no?
China has leverage. You're exactly right. So relatively, compared to the list of those partners that we saw in the reciprocal trade list, China's unique. Things like rare earths that the American economy and American manufacturers desperately need, but also remember the impact to the American economy. These are intertwined, highly integrated economies. I don't think the White House wants American consumers paying higher costs on everything from toaster ovens to the lunch boxes that parents are buying for their kids as they return to school right now. And
we will get back to what those longer costs might be, not just economically, but larger in terms of alliances and trust in the U.S. as a security partner. Stay with us. Clark Jennings will be here for the rest of the bulletin. Managing Director Asia of Kroll Global Advisors. We will stay on the conversation later on this bulletin.